Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for today's webinar From IEP to Independence. My name is Alexia Serratore, and I am the Community Outreach and Family Support Program Coordinator with Dyslexia Canada, and I'm thrilled to be speaking about a topic that is very close to my heart, post-secondary accessibility services. This year, I crossed the stage to receive my Master of Education degree, and if you had told me years ago that I would earn a graduate degree, I'm not sure that I would have believed you. I'm not sharing this to establish my credentials for tonight's presentation. I'm sharing it because I want to begin on a note of possibility. Over the years, many students I've worked with have expressed concerns about pursuing post-secondary education, because they worry the support that they relied on in elementary school or high school won't be available to them. And I'm here to reassure you that that is far from the truth. Post-secondary institutions offer a wide range of accessibility services and accommodations designed to help students succeed. What is different is that students are expected to take a more active role in accessing and managing those supports. That increased independence can feel overwhelming at first, and it is completely understandable to feel uncertain about where to begin. Before we get into the information, I want to acknowledge something important. This transition can bring up a lot of emotion. For students, it can feel like stepping into a bigger, less familiar system. For parents and caregivers, it can feel hard to step back while still wanting to protect and support your child. Those feelings are valid. My hope is that today's session gives you practical information, but also a sense that you're not alone in this process. Today's webinar is designed to make the transition to post-secondary education clearer and more manageable. We'll begin by defining accessibility in post-secondary settings and why this conversation matters. From there, we'll look at how supports change after high school, where students can start when connecting with accessibility services, what documentation and accommodations may be required, and the role students play in self-advocacy. We'll also discuss how to choose the right post-secondary fit and identify practical next steps so students can move forward with greater confidence. So what is accessibility? Accessibility means designing environments, products, services, and learning experiences so everyone, especially people with disabilities, can fully participate. Accessibility in post-secondary education is not simply a helpful service or an optional support. It is grounded in legal obligations, including human rights protections, and the duty to accommodate students with disabilities up to the point of undue hardship. At the same time, accessibility is also a practical, educational commitment. It means designing learning environments, services, and systems so students can participate as fully as possible. Traditionally, many supports are accessed through a request-based model, where students connect with an accessibility or disability services office and seek individual accommodations. However, increasingly, institutions are also focusing on broader approaches such as Universal Design for Learning, which aims to make courses and learning environments more accessible from the start. The main idea is that accessibility is about reducing barriers. It's not about lowering expectations. It's about creating conditions where students can demonstrate their learning and participate meaningfully in post-secondary education. Most colleges and universities have accessibility services, but that does not mean that the process always feels easy to understand. Families may find themselves asking, where do we start? What documentation do we need? Who do we contact? The challenge is usually not whether support exists. The challenge is knowing how to access it and how to manage it once it's approved. That's why this conversation matters. When students understand the process before they're in crisis, they are much more likely to use support effectively. One of the biggest transitions is that post-secondary support is not the same as high school support. In high school, students may have had an IEP, informal teacher support, modified timelines, or adults checking in regularly. Parents may have also been closely involved in meetings and communications with the school. In post-secondary, the process is usually more formal, more documentation-based, and more student-led. This does not mean that the student is on their own. It means that the support system is structured differently. The student usually has to initiate contact, attend meetings, describe their needs, activate accommodations, and follow deadlines. For some students, that can feel empowering. For other students, it can feel intimidating. And for many, it's both. When researching a college or university, the best first stop is usually the school's accessibility office. Different schools use different names, but these offices usually serve a similar role. They review documentation, meet with students, help identify academic barriers, and create accommodation plans. The general admissions page may tell you how to apply to the school, but the accessibilities office tells you how to access disability-related supports once you're there. A helpful first task is to go to the school's website and search terms like accessibility services, accessible learning, or academic accommodations. When you find the Accessibility Services website, scan for practical information. You want to know, how does the student register? What documentation is required? Is there an intake form? Are there deadlines? How are accommodated tests and exams booked? Are interim accommodations possible? Does the office help with assistive technology, learning strategies, or funding? A useful rule of thumb is this: if the website only answers who qualifies, but not how does this actually work, keep digging. You are looking for the process, not just the policy. Although every school does things a little differently, the process often follows a very similar pattern. The student completes an intake or registration form, submits documentation, and meets with an accessibility advisor. Together, they discuss the student's needs, barriers, and possible accommodations. Then, an accommodation plan may be created. But this is the most important thing to understand. Approval is not always the final step. At many schools, students still need to activate accommodations each term, release accommodation letters to instructors, and book accommodated tests or exams separately. That ongoing management piece is where students get caught off guard. When schools review documentation, they are usually not only looking for diagnosis. They're trying to understand functional impact. Functional impact means how a disability or health condition affects learning, participation, communication, attendance, testing, or access in an academic environment. For example, a diagnosis might explain what's going on, but functional impact explains what the student needs. A student with dyslexia may need text-to-speech, extra time, or alternate format materials. A student with ADHD may need reduced distraction testing or help with planning systems. The goal is not to give every student the same support. The goal is to reduce barriers so students can demonstrate what they know. Documentation is one area where schools can differ quite a bit. Some students may have an IEP from high school. That can be very helpful background information, but it may not be enough on its own, especially for some accommodations for learning disabilities. Some schools may require current medical documentation. Some may require a psychoeducational assessment. That is why families should ask early, is our current documentation enough for this student's situation? That one question can save weeks of confusion. Some students and families assume that they should wait until every document is complete before contacting accessibility services. In many cases, it's better to reach out earlier. That does not mean that every accommodation will be approved without documentation, but the office may be able to explain what is needed, discuss interim options, identify funding pathways, or help the student figure out what the next step is. The message here is simple. Incomplete paperwork should not stop a student from starting the conversation. Starting early gives students more time, more options, and less pressure. When people hear accessibility services, they often think of extra time on exams. That is one common accommodation, but it's not the whole picture. Many schools offer or coordinate note-taking support, assistive technology, alternate format textbooks, learning strategies, academic coaching, peer mentorship, transition programming, and help with disability-related grants or bursaries. There may also be support for placements, labs, fieldwork, co-op, clinical settings, or temporary disabilities. I want to pause here and shine a spotlight on a few specific supports that families may not know to ask about. First, ask about note-taking support. This might include peer note sharing, volunteer note takers, audio recording options, or note-taking technology. This can be especially helpful for students who have a difficulty listening, processing, and writing at the same time. Second, ask whether the school has access to assistive technology and assistive technology support. Some students may benefit from tools like text-to-speech, speech-to-text, screen readers, reading and writing software, audio recording tools, or organization apps. Just as importantly, some schools have an assistive technologist who can help students choose the right tools and learn how to use them effectively. Third, look for learning strategists or academic coaching. These supports can help students build practical systems for time management, planning, studying, reading, writing, test preparation, and managing procrastination. For students with ADHD, learning disabilities, or executive functioning challenges, this can be just as important as an exam accommodation. Fourth, ask about transition programs. Some schools offer summer programs, orientation sessions, peer mentorship, or first-year transition supports specifically for students with disabilities. These programs can help students understand the accessibility process before classes begin and can make the move from high school to post-secondary feel less overwhelming. Finally, ask about funding support. Accessibility offices may be able to guide students toward disability-related grants, bursaries, assessment funding, equipment funding, or support for assistive technology and tutoring. This is important to ask about early because funding often has documentation requirements, deadlines, and approval steps. One of the best questions to ask is not only, can I get extra time? A stronger question is, what services and tools does your office offer beyond formal accommodations? That question often reveals much more about how the office supports students. This is one of the most important practical pieces. A student can be approved for accommodations and still miss out on support if they do not understand the following steps. At many schools, students need to activate accommodations each term, choose which accommodations apply to each course, release letters to their instructors, and book accommodated exams by a deadline. For students who struggle with executive functioning, organization, anxiety, memory, or asking for help, the accommodation process itself can become hard to manage. That does not mean that the student cannot do it. It means that they may need a system. This could be calendar reminders, a checklist, support from a learning strategist, a weekly planning routine, or a trusted person helping them prepare questions before meetings. While deadlines are not the most exciting part of this process, they are one of the most important. Schools often encourage early registration because accommodations may not be guaranteed if a student starts too late. There may also be separate deadlines for midterms, quizzes, final exams, or different terms. Students who know that they will need support from day one should not wait until the first test is announced. A good habit is to register early, learn the booking system, and put key deadlines into a calendar before the term becomes busy. Accessibility counselors are often the key connection between the student and the post-secondary environment. Their role is not simply to approve extra time or file paperwork. They review documentation, meet with students, ask about barriers, and help develop accommodation plans based on how a disability affects learning, participation, testing, communication, or access. They may also provide disability-related counseling and support students with practical skills such as self-advocacy, time management, stress management, and problem solving. For some students, this support is especially important because managing accommodations can itself require organization, communication, and follow-through. Accessibility counselors also work with faculty and campus partners to make sure accommodations are implemented appropriately while still respecting academic integrity and course requirements. They may connect students with academic advising, financial aid, learning strategists, assistive technology, writing support, counseling, or other services. The important takeaway is that students do not have to figure out the system alone. Accessibility counselors help students understand their rights, their responsibilities, and the steps that they can take to access support with more confidence. Sometimes self-advocacy gets framed as if students should suddenly be able to do everything independently. That is not realistic and it is not kind. Self-advocacy is a skill. It develops with practice. It means learning how to understand your needs, ask questions, use support, and follow up when something is not working. It also means learning what you do well, not only what is hard. Students do not need to become perfect advocates overnight. They need opportunities to practice before the stakes feel too high. For parents and caregivers, the shift can be hard too. The role often changes from speaking for the student to helping the student prepare to speak for themselves. For parents and supporters, this transition can feel emotional. You may be used to advocating, emailing, attending meetings, and making sure support is in place. In post-secondary, privacy rules and student independence often change how involved you can be. That does not mean that your role disappears. It means the role shifts. You can help the student prepare. You can help them organize documentation, practice what to say, create checklists, set reminders, and reflect on what worked and what did not work. One of the most powerful things a supporter can communicate is, "I believe you can do this, and I will help you build the skills to manage it." When comparing schools, do not only ask, "Does this school offer accommodations?" Most schools do. A better question is the system understandable, responsive, and realistic for the student to manage? Look at how clearly the school explains registration, documentation, exam booking, deadlines, and ongoing responsibilities. Look for broader supports like learning strategists, assistive technology, transition programming, peer mentorship, and funding guidance. A school may have strong supports, but if the process is unclear, students may struggle to access them. Fit is about both the availability of support and the student's ability to navigate the system. One of the best ways to reduce uncertainty is to ask direct questions. Students and families can ask about the first step, whether the process can begin before the term starts, and how long it usually takes. They should also ask about what documentation is accepted, whether it needs to be recent, and whether an IEP is helpful or sufficient. If the student is waiting for an assessment or diagnosis, ask what can happen in the meantime. You do not need to know all the answers before reaching out. Asking a question is part of the process. Before I move on to final remarks, I would like to touch upon some frequently asked questions from your registration to today's webinar. Does an IEP or dyslexia diagnosis carry over to post-secondary, or is a new psychoeducational assessment required? No. An IEP does not automatically carry over from high school to university or college. A dyslexia diagnosis remains part of the student's history, but post-secondary institutions usually require current documentation that explains how the disability affects the student's learning now. This often means providing a recent psychoeducational assessment, sometimes completed in grade 12, or within the institution's required time frame. Many psychoeducational assessments need to be updated every 5 years, although requirements can vary by province, institution, or student aid program. Can a student receive a reduced workload accommodation in post-secondary? Yes. Students with disabilities may be eligible to take a reduced course load while still being considered a full-time student for accessibility or financial aid purposes. This can help protect access to funding, services, and other supports. In post-secondary, a reduced course load usually means a student takes fewer courses each semester, but they're still expected to complete the same course requirements, assignments, and program outcomes in order to graduate. Will students have access to editing, proofreading, or writing support? Yes. Most institutions offer writing centers, academic support services, and assistive technology such as text-to-speech, speech-to-text, and editing tools. Writing centers can help students brainstorm, outline, draft, revise, improve citations, and strengthen overall writing skills. These services are not just for proofreading, they are designed to help students become stronger, more independent writers. Will using accommodations hurt a student's chances of getting into graduate school? No. Accessibility services are confidential. Graduate schools, employers, and other institutions cannot access accommodation records unless the student chooses to disclose them. Additionally, in Canada, rejecting someone from a program because of a disability or because they used accessibility supports is considered discrimination and is against human rights legislation. Students can also access accommodations and accessibility supports while in graduate school. What happens if a student is applying outside their home province, such as Quebec? This guide is based on post-secondary accessibility supports across Canada. The supports discussed are generally available across the country, but the process, documentation requirements, terminology, and funding rules may vary by province, territory, or institution. Students should contact the Accessibility Services Office at a college or university that they plan to attend as early as possible. The office can explain exactly what documentation is required and what supports may be available. What funding or financial support may be available? Students with disabilities may be eligible for federal grants and other financial supports to help cover accessibility-related services, equipment, and assessments. These funds are usually administered through provincial or territorial student aid offices, but federal disability-related grants are available across Canada. One major source of support is the Canada Student Grant for Services and Equipment, Students with Disabilities. Eligible students may receive funding for education-related services and equipment, including psychoeducational or psychological assessments. Students may also be eligible for the student grant for students with disabilities, which provides additional funding to help with general costs of post-secondary education. The school's Accessibility Services Office can help students understand what funding may be available and how to apply. Where can families go if they're unsure what their child needs? Families can contact the school's Accessibility Services Office for guidance. Accessibility staff can review psychoeducational assessments, previous IEPs, and other documentation to help determine appropriate accommodations. Dyslexia Compass can also help families understand available supports, prepare questions for accessibility services offices, and navigate next steps. Navigating post-secondary accessibility services can feel overwhelming, but you don't have to figure this out alone. Dyslexia Canada's Family Support Program, Dyslexia Compass, is available to help families and individuals understand what supports may be available, what questions to ask, and what steps to take next. Whether you're trying to understand documentation requirements, prepare for a meeting with accessibility services, explore funding options, or figure out how to advocate for the right accommodations, Dyslexia Compass can help guide you through the process. I encourage families, students, and individuals to reach out whenever they feel stuck, unsure, or uncertain about the next step. Sometimes the hardest part is knowing where to begin, and Dyslexia Compass is here to help make that process feel clearer and more manageable. As we come toward the end, here is what I hope you remember. Support does exist in post-secondary educations. Students with disabilities can and do access accommodations, but high school supports do not transfer automatically. Students need to register, provide documentation, meet with the office, and learn how to manage this process. Start early. Do not wait until a crisis. And please remember, accommodations are not about lowering expectations. They're about reducing barriers. The right support can change what feels possible. I know that personally, and I've seen it in the lives of many students. I want to end where we began, with possibility. For students listening today, you may still feel nervous. That's okay. Confidence does not always come before action. Sometimes confidence comes because you take one step, then another, and then another. For parents and supporters, you may still feel protective. That's okay too. This transition can be emotional. Your belief in the student matters. Your support still matters. It may simply look different now. You do not need to have the whole path figured out today. You only need the next step. Maybe that step is visiting the Accessibility Services website for one school. Maybe it's finding documentation. Maybe it's sending an email. Maybe it's writing down 3 questions that you have. Maybe it's having a conversation about what support has helped in the past. Post-secondary education can feel intimidating, but students do not have to enter it without support. When in doubt, I encourage you to reach out to Dyslexia Compass, who can give you advice specific to your strengths, challenges, and help navigate the process of registering for and navigating supports at the institution you're interested in attending. The goal is not for students to become perfect self-advocates overnight. The goal is for them to know that support exists, that they're allowed to ask for it, and that with the right tools, the future that they are imagining can become more than a possibility. Thank you.